What does it mean to have good genetics? So this video is going to be useful for anyone interested in maximising their physique progress, but in particular competitive bodybuilders. So bodybuilding, it's pretty well accepted, is one of the most genetically predetermined sports in the world. If you don't have a certain level of genetic gifts, then you simply just aren't going to go anywhere with it. But when we talk about genetics within bodybuilding or physique sports, what are we actually talking about? So the first thing we want to address here is your body fat, and in particular what we're looking for is a low body fat settling point. So really good example of this would be someone like my client Ant here. So these are going to be people with a low number of total adipose cells, all right? And what this allows you to do is it allows you to comfortably hold a much lower body fat percentage than the average person. So the way this sort of works is if you have a set number of body fat cells, as those cells fill up, we're going to be fill up with body fat, we're going to feel fuller and more satiated. So if you have a very high number of body fat cells, you're going to find that you have to fill up those cells just as much as someone with a lower number of body fat cells. And you're going to need a much higher total amount of body fat on your physique in order to feel comfortable and satiated and not too hungry. Whereas someone with a lower number of body fat cells is going to be very comfortable at a lower body fat percentage, okay? The second thing to address here is that whilst this is a genetic component, very often those with low body fat percentages tend to be those with a lower appetite and those with a higher activity level. So the genetic component is certainly a big proportion of this, but it isn't all that goes into it. Those people that walk around shredded, a lot of the time they're very active and they don't eat that much. The other thing to address with body fat is where it settles on your physique. If you have a very even body fat distribution, you can walk around a higher total amount of body fat on your physique and still look pretty aesthetic. Whereas if you're unfortunate to store all your body fat on your abs, you're going to have to get much, much leaner than someone else with a more even body fat distribution in order to create a physique that you're going to be happy with visually. Next up, we've got your ability to gain muscle. So there are multiple components that go into this. First one is going to be your hormone profile. If you've got a very high level of natural testosterone production, you're going to naturally hold or build more muscle, and you're also likely going to hold a lower body fat level as well. Next up, we've got things like gene expression. So we've got A-actinin 3, which is responsible for your fast twitch muscle fibers. If you've got a higher level of these, you're going to have an easier time building muscle mass. Then you've also got things like deficiencies and things like myostatin. You've all seen those pictures of those massive muscly bulls that are too big to have sex with each other. And those are going to be due to myostatin deficiencies. So again, you get this in humans. You see the odd picture of those absolutely wham children. That's from usually a myostatin deficiency, I would have thought. Next up, you're going to find that some people have certain muscle groups. So for myself, my chest grows very easily, everything else grows terribly. And you've got some individuals where everything grows very easily. But you're going to find that certain muscle groups are going to be very genetically predisposed. So things like calves and forearms, they have relatively low growth potential versus other muscle groups. And therefore, if you are genetically gifted in those areas, you've already got a massive advantage over other people because you don't have to waste loads and loads of time trying to build those relatively stubborn muscle groups. Next up, you've got your skeletal proportions. So this is a huge one in actual competitive bodybuilding. If you've got a very wide clavicle, so I'm going to use here a very genetically gifted client of mine, Carl, who is a natural pro bodybuilder. If you've got a very wide clavicle, so your shoulders are naturally very wide relative to your waist, you're going to have a much better V taper. People always say, oh, but you can build your shoulders, build your lats. That's still what you're hanging off that frame. The frame, you've got to be genetically gifted to have that. There's nothing you can do to change the width of your clavicles or even your waist. If you're lean, you're lean. You're not getting that waist any smaller. Waist trainers don't work. Next up, you've got your things like your muscle bellies. So this is going to be the shape and length of your muscles. So you'll see things like the calves or the biceps. If you've got a very long tendon, you're going to have a very short and not very aesthetic looking muscle belly. You've also got a component of this to the overall structure of your muscles. So a good example here is something like abs. Again, I'll use Carl, very symmetrical abs, and then a picture of myself. You can see my abs are asymmetric. Again, absolutely nothing you can do to change the structure of those muscles. All you can do is grow them, okay? One of the more less mentioned, terrible English, variables when it comes to your ability to progress your physique is going to be your durability and your ability to recover from hard training. If you're someone that picks up a lot of niggles and you're constantly battling connective tissue problems, that's going to be a real bottleneck. Whereas someone that's really durable can handle hammering away with high volumes of high intensity training, and they're going to be able to progress their physique a lot further because they're not going to be constantly having to deload or take active rest periods, be rehabbing injuries. They can just train hard all the time and grow from it. On the enhanced bodybuilding side of things, you've then got something like things like your response to drugs. So certain people get a much better response to anabolics and the other drugs involved in the bodybuilding sphere than others do. So they require a much lower amount of total dosage of anabolics in order to grow muscle, okay? Whereas if you've got worse genetics, you're gonna have to take more side effects, and that's ultimately gonna cut your career down. Finally, you've got one that's a little bit tenuous, whether it counts as sort of nature versus nurture. Is it genetics? Is it what you're sort of like, how you evolved to be over time? But then you've got your mental disposition. Building a physique requires years and years of sort of consistently doing things that most people wouldn't consider particularly fun. Training really hard, dieting really hard, being very consistent and regimented with your day-to-day routine. If you're someone where you enjoy that kind of regimen and structure, it's going to be much easier for you to build a really impressive physique. Whereas if you're someone that wants to be off exploring the world, getting drunk every weekend, then you're not going to be having an easy time improving your physique relative to someone who naturally finds those things very satisfying. Hope you find that useful.